Boy, this NIL thing keeps changing day by day, but this latest change may really help Auburn.
In the world full of podcasts, he's the undisputed heavyweight champion of hot takes, an Auburn sports homer, master of the boog, and message board legend. Get your buttons buttoned and your hats flattened because the Top Button Podcast is about to kick off, and you don't want to miss your courtside seat. Now, here's your host, Charlie Five.
Yes, sir. We're back. It's another episode of the Top Button Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie Five, and we are ready to get after it. The college football NIL landscape seems like changes. It changes every single day. The latest news that the College Sports Commission and the House attorneys have reached a deal with power conferences, basically saying, you know what? Collectives are okay after all. We're going to talk about the ramifications of all of that. Did John Cohen get it wrong? That's been going around. Does this confirm that he got it wrong, or maybe does this confirm that he got it right? And then we're going to talk about the Auburn boogeyman. What do you think that means? We'll talk about that in just a second. But before we get started, let's give a quick shout out to Rhoback.com. Use coupon code BARN20 to take 20% off your order. Give them a chance, man. You got to check out their hoodies, their polos, all of it's great stuff. The material's really good. They look really good. They fit really good. And then obviously you got all the fun prints, or you can go as classic as you want to go. They got it in a little bit of everything. So show them some love and save big. It's Rhoback.com. Like I mentioned in the opener, the College Sports Commission and the House attorneys reached a settlement, or reached a deal, basically saying that collectives, when we say collectives, we're talking about like think On to Victory, are now considered legitimate business operations. Okay, what does that mean? Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, back like before this whole ruling, back last year, the collectives were a main driver of how these kids got their NIL dollars. Okay, donors would give money to the collectives. The collectives would then disperse the funds, and then they would have what they called fulfillment, which is the requirements for the student athletes to do, whether that be videos, events, autographs, pictures, whatever, to satisfy the amount of money that they received. That was kind of the setup. Really weren't a ton of guidelines, really weren't a ton of checks and balances. And it was pretty much the wild, wild west. Fast forward to the July ruling, the July 1st settlement, or the July 1st deadline that basically everything had to start going through NIL Go, and the settlement that happened a little bit prior to that. It basically rendered NIL collectives somewhat useless for a period of time, because they were not deemed that mystical title of being a true business operation. In other words, the NCAA and the House, they did not view collectives as legitimate advertising, as needing legitimate advertising needs. So, for example, Nike, they just signed Ryan Williams. That's a legitimate company that picked out a legitimate athlete, and they came to an agreement on a deal. And there will be value that Nike will receive from Ryan Williams. And you could go as high or as on a low level as you want to. And that's where the whole $600 or above value has to go through NIL Go. And basically they said for a period of time, up until just yesterday, that money could not directly come from collectives anymore because they were not deemed one of those legitimate businesses. Nike, it could be Byron Smokehouse in Auburn, or insert car dealership name, insert restaurant, insert whatever, doctor's office. They did not view once that first settlement came through. They did not review. They did not view collectives in that manner. So what a lot of teams did was, I think you can look at the actual date was around July 10th. A lot of teams completely disbanded their collectives. Just basically said, there's no use for us anymore, so we're going to shut them down. Whether that means completely shut down or vastly reduce the size or whatever, there's a lot of teams that just basically threw their collective to the wayside. Said, that's not what we're going to do anymore. We're going to come in-house. Auburn was not one of those. Auburn kept their collective going, operating. Now, it was more so in a preparation because just in case something like this were to happen, because there was really nothing that they could do besides maybe act as an intermediary between a business and an athlete. So fast forward to yesterday, and then it's basically, okay, now we've come to an agreement that collectives are once again considered a legitimate business operation that can justify, I guess, advertising deals with athletes. Now, if you went out and disbanded your collective, you're probably scrambling right now, trying to figure out how we get this whole thing back together. Probably a lot of those schools brought those folks in-house. What would be the advantage to having a collective versus kind of running your collective in-house? According to Pete Nakos, there's a lot of the rulings, Pete Nakos from On3, a lot of the, I guess, the definitional terms and the rules about it will come out a little bit more today. But a lot of the hypotheticals are that the collectives may not have as many restrictions as far as deal value goes as running it through the NIL Go in-house. And he said one hypothetical source threw out that, maybe NIL collectives can cut a deal up to $4,900 without having to go through NIL Go, versus the other way, you may only have up to $599 because at $600 it has to go through NIL Go, which is the clearinghouse. So if you still have your collective and you've been preparing for this, sort of maybe seeing this on the horizon, you might be ready to go start really pushing some bigger NIL quote unquote promises or NIL, I guess NIL deals, NIL values to recruits and even current players. Remember a couple of shows ago, and I had several people ask me in my comments, what are you talking about? I said there's two avenues that Auburn was preparing for behind the scenes. This is one of them. The collective never shut down. Not only did the collective never shut down, but they've been actively sort of preparing for a situation like this where they will have to be called upon to start executing deals again. Hugh Freeze mentioned it in some of the SEC media days. He said, John Cohen has a marketing firm that he's hired in case you have to go in this direction. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on behind the scenes. Auburn never pulled the plug on the collective, sort of maybe seeing this in the distance, that this could be something that could happen. And if it does, Auburn's going to be ready to pounce on it. So could that be why you're starting to see a little bit more activity on the trail? Could that be why you're starting to see, hey, it's not that August 1st date yet? Why does it seem like Auburn's picking up steam? Maybe it's because they were prepared for something like this. So I've been hearing, does this prove John Cohen was wrong? I've been hearing that. I've been seeing it on message boards. I want to talk about that in just a second. We'll be back right after this. I hope that was from a very 1,000-foot view, kind of got you back up to speed on what this ruling means. Collectives were a no-go as recent as July 1st. So from July 1st on, collectives were a no-go. They were not deemed a legitimate in other words, you heard that term third-party deal. They were not deemed a legitimate third-party deal giver. They couldn't be considered a third-party deal. Now they can. So it's as simple as that. A lot of teams shut down their collectives because of that. Auburn did not. So for a lot of the folks that think Auburn's typically not very forward-thinking, that seems like something they were prepared for. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the Cohen thing. Been seeing this a lot. Fire him immediately. I've seen that. Relieve him of his duties. He was wrong. And I just have to ask, we just have to look at what was Cohen's stance to begin with, okay? Cohen's stance has always been not, let's don't do NIL, not you can't pay players outside of rev share because it's going to count against the cap. It's always revolved around the promise of NIL above rev share. The promise of NIL above rev share and then the fulfillment thereof. Okay? Because if you put on paper a dollar amount, you are bound to fulfill that dollar amount. And as we have seen, the landscape changes day by day by day. Okay? You're not sure how NIL Go is going to work for incoming freshmen. Works great for players on campus. It's pretty easy to judge their value. It's pretty easy to justify their deals. They have value. The freshmen incoming are completely unpredictable. So his whole thing was not, it had nothing to do with amounts. It had everything to do. It didn't really have anything to do with collectives. It had everything to do with promising money up front. And then how do you justify that based off the rules that we were given? How do you justify? So if you give somebody promise somebody $100,000, how do you get that $100,000 clear through NIL Go? Now, could he have been a little bit of foreseeing by not shutting down the collective? Could that be why you're being patient? Hey, if they don't shut down collectives all the way, this could be that could be an avenue to be able to use to justify the numbers that we promise. And we feel more confident promising those numbers. Now, if your train of thought is that we should have just always been promising these high numbers because this was bound to happen. I mean, you're talking about predicting the unpredictable. You're talking about predicting that we're okay promising a number because surely somebody's going to sue somebody and this is going to be fixed. That is a huge gamble whenever you have salary caps and you have penalties that come from those salary caps should you not be able to fulfill a deal. Now, can we argue probability till we're blue in the face? Sure. I'm sure you may think if you think Cohen was wrong, you think that there was a high probability that none of this was going to be able to be enforced. And maybe you could make a good argument for that. I'm not going to argue probabilities. I just don't think that the NIL ruling just now of saying that collectives are now again legitimate third parties, I don't think that has really anything to do with Cohen's stance prior. I don't think those are related. I think that's trying to add some things together that don't really go together. And honestly, it kind of, in my opinion, it kind of proves that, I don't want to say that he was right, but it does prove that it took something like this. It took something like a ruling. When does the government, when does the House, when do they ever do anything quickly? This settlement took over a year to be able to finally come to a conclusion. Who knew that it would only take 22 days from July 1st to July 22nd to reinsert collectives back into the conversation? So honestly, this kind of proves that maybe he was right in that it was going to take something like this to be able to justify the dollar terms where we feel comfortable promising. It was going to take something like that. And what are the odds that something like that is going to happen in 22 days? It's happened. They were prepared for it. So now, could they see, again, could they have seen the writing on the wall a little bit? And that's why it seems like Auburn could go on a little bit of a run in recruiting here soon. We've talked about the prospects that Auburn feels like they lead for and that announce soon. There's some surprises out there too. There's some other names that I think are about to pop up very, very soon that are committed elsewhere that are going to start, I think, looking at Auburn a little bit harder, and especially if Auburn gets off to a good start. So those will be fun. That'll be a fun time. This next month and a half is going to be really fun to follow because I think Auburn's going to soar up the recruiting rankings. But yeah, was Cohen wrong? I don't think he was. I don't think this has anything to do. I think that question is still not answered. It definitely wasn't answered by this. And it seems like Auburn was prepared for this. Okay. So I want to shift gears. I want to talk about the Auburn boogeyman. As long as I've been a fan of Auburn, as long as I've been associated with the Auburn University, there has always been an Auburn boogeyman. Auburn fans, it seems like it's just a thing. There's always a shadowy figure. Sometimes it's not so shadowy, but there's always someone behind the curtain that's holding Auburn back. Whether it's a booster, whether it's Jimmy Rain, whether it's Bobby Lauder, whether it's Jay Jacobs, that was a big one. There's always a figure that if you can just get rid of that figure, boy, Auburn's going to soar. They just seem to want to hold Auburn back. They want to seem to have all the control. They seem to have it's all about them. And that's why Auburn can't do insert XYZ. It seems like John Cohen is the boogeyman this go around. Where does that come from? Where did that start? For those that are, older in the, 60s, 70s, 80s, sure, there's always the boogeyman in Birmingham. There's always the SEC boogeyman in Birmingham, Bammerham. There's always the boogeyman of the media. There's always the boogeyman of this, that, and the other. But there's typically always an Auburn boogeyman as well. Who were those back in the day? Or is this something relatively new? I can think of another one, Rich McGlynn. Rich McGlynn is one that seems to always be labeled as an Auburn boogeyman. The guy that got Auburn off the hook, essentially. I say off the hook, who handled the Cam Newton saga absolutely flawlessly. Rich McGlynn's always been one that seems to be a boogeyman. John Cohen is definitely the boogeyman this go around. It just seems like there's people out there that are 100% are convinced that he is trying to run Bruce out of town, is, keeping this recruiting enterprise from exploding, even though for the last 2+ years it's been flawless and they've added he's allowed staff to grow. They just hired a brand new person into the player personnel department under Will Redmond, another big name guy from Arkansas that worked with Hugh at Liberty. He's allowed this recruiting operation to expand and new positions to be created seemingly by the hour. But John Cohen's the boogeyman this go around. So everything that goes wrong, you watch, it'll always be pointed back to Cohen. I don't know where it comes from. Auburn has to have a boogeyman. So again, I don't really see the correlation between Cohen's stance and collectives being considered, able to be third-party deals again. I don't really see those strategies. How they connect. I don't really see how those two things connect, whether he could be right or whether he could be wrong. I could be wrong. Let me know if you disagree with me in the comments. It's just my take on it. And I hope that kind of cleared some things up. I'm sure that as days go on, more of the rulings will come out. But hey, I'll tell you this. If Pete Nakos, the source, is correct, and collectives, they'll still have to go through NIL Go. But if their deals maybe can be bigger before they actually have to go through NIL Go, then the other way around. So if collectives can actually get a deal of up to close to $5,000 through without having to go through NIL Go, I mean, that opens up a lot of doors. If you got a really good collective now, which Auburn does, you can get after it. You can raise funds and you can get a lot of money in the hands of these players to be able to go out and maybe steal some guys. And if you were prepared for that, which it seems like Auburn was, you maybe could really take advantage of this ruling. We'll see what happens as the days go by, and we'll update you as they come out. So guys, I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know who are some of the boogeymans that you've heard of. Who are some of the guys out there in the shadows, those shadowy figures throughout the years that have quote unquote held Auburn back? I'd love to have that. That's a fun conversation to have. So we'll be back again soon, guys. This is another episode of the Top Button Podcast. Stay buttoned.
Thanks for listening, and drive home safely.